pragmatism, as the kind that informs Goodman's column. Rather, Russia would be saved by holiness, according to Dostoevsky. The kind of the peasants who are the heroes of Dostoevsky's novels were not tainted by Western values of political progress and efficiency, which he knew could be lethal. In them, Orthodox faith was still aflame. Dostoevsky's late 19th century Christian vision of Russia has something to say to us, I think, in early 20th, first century United States, especially in light of the horrors of the century in between. What it has to say is two things. First, we should be wary of any and all political order that justifies itself as a lesser evil of two tolerable evils. And the order of fascism and communism certainly come to mind, but also the order of democracy, which can, as the Pope has pointed out in Evangelium Vitae, issue in its own kind of totalitarianism. The second thing that we should note is that we need to look elsewhere than the state for order. Dostoevsky looked toward the small communities of peasants, and he found their view of holiness to be a sign of hope. They exhibited a kind of indifference to the world of politics, and we, I think, should look for similar kinds of communities ourselves. Now, of course, this brings up my third and concluding points. Of course, there's a danger in invoking the ideals of 19th century Russian authors like Dostoevsky and their vision of the Russian peasantry, the danger of irrelevance to contemporary life. But I think if we look at Dostoevsky's vision more closely and in detail, we can see that the Russian peasantry may not be as irrelevant as we might suppose at first. Indeed, it's very relevant to aspects of our lives today, and I would like to mention three in particular, three issues. The first is this, how we care for our parents. The second is the issue of keeping the Lord's Day, and the third is family farming as a way of life. First, the care of our parents, a pressing concern for many of us as we enter middle age. A life expectancy now is 70 years or 80 for those who are strong, according to the psalmist, or maybe 80 years, and 90 for those who are strong. Pursuit of career, economic advancement, necessity, sends people away from their hometown, away from their parents. Parents are left alone now more than ever. Crisis sets in when one parent becomes ill, especially if that parent is the only one living. I faced this myself 2.5 years ago with the serious stroke of my mother and then her eventual death 4 months later. If we look at this politically in terms of this election, several issues come to the fore. Prescription drugs, regulating nursing homes, euthanasia and the right to die. But none of these issues in our national scene approach the heart of the issue, which deals with questions that are more probing in nature, questions that I think all of us ask, questions that go to the kind of life that we live and whether it's a good life and how it can be. Questions regarding, for example, keeping the fourth commandment, honor thy mother and thy father. How must we live in order to make it possible to honor our mother and our father? How would we deliberate over that? To do so, there's a necessary understanding already intact. We would have to have assumptions regarding what it is to care for our parents, the nature of family, the nature of children, an entire web of beliefs and practices that stem from our tradition and our culture as Catholics. Assumptions which are not intact in U.S. society and can't be reduced to interests and values and put into a political calculus. Yet they are essential to our understanding of the good life. The Church's role in caring for the elderly, the role of the parish, the role of Catholic hospitals. Those are our issues. Another issue, keeping the Lord's Day. The shape of the Holy Day is rapidly vanishing in our society. Cardinal O'Connor brought this up in New York in the spring of 1998 when the Yankees had their opening day on Good Friday. The game started at 1:30. Cardinal said, between the hours of 12 and 3. And then he said, even the Red Sox had their game in the evening that day. Those are fighting words in New York, let me tell you. He said he wasn't going to the game all that year. It turned out to be the best year the Yankees ever had. I don't know what you make of that. Later on that summer, he brought up the issue of soccer leagues on Sunday mornings. People's Sundays are being taken over. Also, of course, by market dynamics, not just soccer, both parents are working. There's no time to shop except Sundays. The difficulty of legislating these laws is immense because of religious pluralism. The impossibility of discussing this on a national scale, state, or even local scale. Yet it certainly pertains to our common lives as Catholics. It's not a private individual issue. It's not an issue merely of our interest. It's an issue of our survival. And yet we're not capable of bringing it to the fore. How do we take our leisure? What is the place of commerce in our lives? What is the quality of family life? What is the quality of our communal lives, our parish lives? Third issue, the family farm as a way of life, an issue that I bring out because many of you could speak about this more authoritatively than I could. The remarkable accomplishment of national politics in recent years is its ability to suppress questions regarding the disappearance of the family farm as a way of life. A way of life that's been integral to world culture since ancient times. At stake are the virtues of independence, cooperation, relation to the land, all implied in a conception of good farming. Authors such as Wendell Berry and others have written on this, yet their statements, powerful as they are, have had no effective political impact on the national scene, not because they have been heard and rejected, but because they have not been heard at all. There are, of course, crucial issues: taxes, tariffs, farm subsidies, interest rates, bankruptcy laws. But these deal with the process of transformation of family farming into multinational agribusiness. And these issues are decided by bureaucrats, debated by legislators, lumped together into party platforms, and played off against one another as issues. Nowhere is the question systematically asked and answered, should we or should we not acquiesce to the disappearance of this way of life? A question which can only be answered by those who know what good farming is. And the disappearance of good farmers will be the disappearance of even a standard to know what farming is, just like the disappearance of baseball would mean the disappearance of what a good batter is. But these questions are excluded from the political process. Perhaps even here, precisely because the depth of the crisis, it seems like a luxury to ask what is the value of this way of life, and maybe compare it to the value of the way of life which dominates our culture, the life of the fashionably hedonistic consumer. How do we begin to address these fundamental concerns? Maybe we need to turn to the Amish to learn how it is that they manage to retain their farms and the way of life that's integral to their flourishing. Discussions like this need to happen here at Iowa State, and I'm sure that they do. Wendell Berry should be in the core curriculum at Iowa State University, but before that there ought to be a core curriculum at Iowa State. Maybe there is, but I venture to say there's not. These were the concerns of the National Catholic Rural Life Conference that was founded early this century in order to support farm life as the life in which the faith made its most sense. It makes sense that this would be a church issue because the disappearance of good farmers will lead to the disappearance of standards of good farming, and this in turn will diminish the standards of the good life. One of the great dilemmas of modern society and state politics is the lack of a forum in order to discuss, explore the good life, to take it away from political elites. And without that kind of forum, genuine politics, shared deliberation on our common assumptions of how we live, ceases to exist. The church can assist in this predicament by providing a forum for these discussions to occur. Two contributions it can make in particular. First, its identity as a pilgrim city of God underscores to us that this earthly city is but a pale reflection of true justice, and that the fate of nations and empires for Christians are ultimately a matter of indifference. Second, as the body of Christ in this world, the church provides an image of true goodness, true holiness, enabling us to imitate Christ, the good person, the good man, transforming our indifference into a holy indifference, so that the church becomes a site for a true politics, a politics of holy indifference. This is not likely to win many votes this election, but Christianity, who said Christianity should be ahead in the polls anyway? After all, on the day he died, Jesus came dead last in the polls. But that's the day he won our salvation. At any rate, I think that Christian indifference calls us to live as citizens of heaven and thus exhibit a certain indifference to the fate of earthly nations and empires, and yet a holy indifference that frees us to form a life shaped by true service to our true Lord and King. Thank you. We take some questions? We take some questions. Or comments, disagreements, annoyance that I didn't answer the question. Whatever. Yes?
Are you going to vote?
Selectively. Not nationally, I don't think. I mean, in the presidential. You know, I think that the matter of voting is a kind of matter where myself, I'm disposed not to vote. I'm a Catholic worker type, and I support the kind of anarchism that Dorothy Day, who is now in the process, perhaps, of being canonized a saint, supported, where she felt that basically we shouldn't vote because it just encourages the ruling class to oppress the rest of us. And but you know, that can't be the church's view. The church doesn't really teach that. It teaches a kind of, I think, naive understanding of voting, which I think we should dispel too. But maybe we should just be more careful in deciding not just who to vote for, but which elections to vote for, and to use our imaginations. Otherwise, you get a toss-up. A lot of Catholics argue that it should be Bush. Most people I know from Texas don't think so. But those are my friends. Other people have other friends. Yes, sir?
No, I was just thinking your comments about the family farm. You know, most people live in the cities. Most people aren't farmers. So why is this, holding something some ideal? That's what I want to know.
I think it's a tragic tragedy that this way of life would vanish.
Well, maybe that's true. Yeah, I might agree with that. But I don't know why I should be concerned about it. Why we should worry about it.
Because it's a vision of the good life.
Well, let's get a vision of the good life for a city dweller.
Pardon?
Let's get a new vision of the good life for a city dweller.
I'd like to get a vision of a city life that is good, but that can also coexist with a vision of farm life that is good. Can we do that is the question. You think?
Do you think we're returning to the days of feudalism, where the economic corporations take the place of the kings and their courtiers that live off the land, and the rest of the we'll have farm laborers instead of farmers?
I like what you say there. You know, I taught at Duke a few years back, and I tried to tell my students that I would never spend my life teaching at Duke University because it didn't support the good as I understand it. And they were baffled by that. And I asked them to consider that as they sit in front of their computers, how different they are than peasants in the field during feudal times. doing what they're told. I used to have a teacher at Duke who used to say, the boss is everywhere. And then he'd say, the boss is in your living room. You know, the idea that we don't serve powers, that we're not shaped by powers beyond our control, I think is a myth. The question is, which powers are we going to serve? And identifying them, kind of elemental powers of the universe, and try to identify them and shape our lives according to which ones. But power is exerted even if we voluntarily click on the TV. I think if we killed our TV, we'd be much better off. Yeah.
Well, Michael, you said that about Duke, that you would never work at a place that didn't hold good. How is Duke so different from the University of Notre Dame?
We have a fighting chance there. This is a question that Frank asks me with regularity. I do believe we have a fighting chance there because of the self-professed aims of the university. Not that they're entirely realized, as you know, and as I know better than you, but as you often remind me. And but whereas Duke is just success, Notre Dame it's success and successful Catholics. So you know, I like that Catholic part. I want to hang on to a little bit. But you know, to be a little more serious, I worry every semester that Notre Dame is being transformed into an entirely secularized university. Although my own view on this takes a different take, because I think Ex Corde Ecclesia is one possible way to begin to raise those questions and at least look in a more systematic way and sustained way at how we're shaping our institutions of higher education. But it's something that I need to. It's a matter of continual discernment, not automatic. Yes, sir.
You seem to be dancing around the ideology of not talking about capitalism itself.
Yeah.
As a Catholic, I don't think I can be a capitalist anymore. And as far as the family farm, I'm a family farmer. And as the further we get away from the farm or the land, the more violent we become.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm coming from. I see it all the time. I see the uprooting of family farms. Nations like Africa are being uprooted.
Mm-hmm.
Violence is firsthand down there all the time, over there all the time. Nations are collapsing because of the family farm system itself. Getting away from the land is a very serious problem.
Right.
I'm delighted that you see that, but I consider Jesus as a pretty good Marxist myself. That's kind of outlandish, but to some people. But how do we resolve the early church, and now we have capitalism? How does the church? How can the church stand there and say profit for profit's sake, and not be go against that ideology?
You know, it's interesting you point that out. I did kind of dance around that, and upon thinking about this, I think it's because I don't know how much help it would be for any of us to say capitalism is wrong, we shouldn't participate in it, and we're going to do that tonight and tomorrow. You know, it's just like the weather in a way. It's there, and maybe the way we need to think about these things are just to identify areas in our lives where we can make changes little by little. If you've hung on to your farm, you've probably had to make them. And if I'm at Notre Dame, as compromised as it is, I got to make them. I mean, I got to make changes. But they're like, you know, I'm all against capitalism, but there's like money in the streets at Notre Dame. And I got to still figure out how to live. And all of us, most of us here, are going to go work tomorrow. And or go to school or something like that, use expensive computers. And I just think that we have to be the kind of people who can talk about how, in like small groups, and I think the parish is the place to talk about this, to be honest. The parish is the most potentially politically powerful site for Catholics to talk about how it is that we can begin to resist the market dynamics that you're talking about. My own view is, like I just said, is that the first thing we should do is get rid of our televisions so that pastors of parishes, and even Frank Cordero, when he goes out to preach there in these parishes, should say to folks, I challenge you this week, next Sunday, to bring in your TV, all 4 of them. We'll put them in the basement, go home for a week, come back next Sunday, and talk about life without TV for a week only. And then I think we might discover some things. One, well, I think people discover that when it's not around, they don't miss it as much as they thought they would. They might discover, like, oh, I could talk with my husband and wife. Or I could go spend, Americans spend 20 hours a week watching TV, average. It's a part-time job. Think of all the power that's in that. I mean, talking economics. Economics is time. Think of all the power for good. So those kinds of things. In a way, it's got to be by little. But I'm in total agreement with you, and I like what you said. David.
So do Catholics not have any responsibility for the political order? And what would you do with the suggestion that maybe the political order would be better off if Catholics were involved than not?
I think that they would be, and that then Catholics, we should be a lot more strategic about that. Of course, we don't spend much time strategizing about that as a church anyway. We spend a lot of time putting out pamphlets telling everyone to vote, but vote for anyone. Although Cardinal O'Connor of New York, he said don't vote for some people. I kind of liked that. I thought it was a good moment. When he said that to Geraldine Ferraro, someone said to me, well, then what about someone who's voting for, expenditures to be sent to El Salvador? Should you tell them not to vote too? Yeah. Why don't we do that? Why don't bishops tell people how to vote? And yet, yeah, we do have responsibilities along those lines. But I think that would be the work of experts, like the NCCB, USCC, should spend time lobbying with politicians. And it would be good to have Catholics running for mayors and so on. When it gets higher up, I think it becomes more unmanageable and more difficult. And I really do think that issues of material and formal cooperation with evil come into play. I guess I would just say that part of what I'd like to underscore is that there's a lot of political power that we have no matter what happens, and even if some of us go run for office, that political power is still waiting there to be used on a parish level and in local forms. And that if we did that, we would change, that things would be different. I heard Frank Cordero say one time that we don't want all Catholics to be Catholic workers, just 1%. Just 1%. 600,000 Catholics serving the homeless. People wouldn't get away with what they talk about, poverty and economic prosperity, if that were the case. So it's kind of a shift of emphasis rather than an in-principled rejection of politics. Yeah.
But wouldn't the bishops get in trouble with the present administration in the Vatican if they started telling people how to vote here?
They might. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, these come down to particular issues. The one case was when Bishop in San Diego told a representative that she shouldn't come to communion because she was so openly and actively pro-choice. I think those things need to be considered. I don't want to kind of wave the threat of excommunication around, but we do need to be able to define ourselves somehow. And people taking, high-profile stands do have an effect on us, and we can't be indifferent to that. Yes, sir.
I'm very much concerned about the rapidly increasing population of the planet. And whether there isn't something the church can do in the near future to help control the population to a level where we are a sustainable population of the planet and our resources.
That's a hard question. It goes to the issue of contraception immediately. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, the concern was voiced of the overpopulation of the planet and the difficulty of that we face in that regard, and what could the church do about it? Yeah.
Who is it overpopulated by?
What do you mean?
Who has the greatest effect upon the planet? Who is? That's the question. I think.
I think the answer to the question is that people in the United States consume 6% of the world's population or so consume almost half the resources, a large percentage. So some of that, and some of the answer that this has been kind of fought out in the United Nations in recent years, the Vatican's role in that. And some of the answer has been that many of these questions are questions of distribution rather than questions of population. In other words, if people in the United States didn't spend as much, say, energy, air conditioning in the summer, you remember when there was no air conditioning in the summer. I remember it. How did we do it? Fans, right. And now we got to have air conditioning because they build offices with no windows that open. And so in many ways, I do believe that there is validity to the view that a lot of it has to do with consumption patterns and not only population patterns, population growth.
Well, people are cutting down trees that are essential.
Cutting down trees and rainforests. Yeah. Yeah, now there I suppose that people say Al Gore's the man, right? Although some people, environmentalists, say he's not really the man.
Could care less about Gore or Bush, but they wanted a place to live and exist.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Father.
I'm kind of curious. I like the statements and the strength of the statements in saying that we have a community that we can say who we are, define who we are, particularly on a local level. But in a kind of a postmodern pluralistic world, this definition of what we believe, even on the level of a parish, speaking for a parish priest, I don't see this monolith out there in front of me that says, hey, this is who we are, and we all believe the same thing. And the place of individual opinion in that, and also of sin, our individual interpretation of this ideal of the local community. I think that sin is pretty rooted in the individual, let alone in a small community. So,
I mean, I agree that pluralism is a reality in any parish, but it's not an unlimited pluralism because people are there. And I think people are ready to hear what their beliefs are from the pulpit and elsewhere, and would, if say we had meetings like this in parish levels, would be able to come up with common assumptions. Now, sometimes not. But I think that the parish and schools and certain other community organizations do have the ability, which is being lost in this country, of having a shared conception of what is the good life. Of course, shaping that is the job of parish priest and the community as a whole. But I don't think pluralism is itself an insurmountable problem. Paul surely had to deal with pluralism in the early church, within the community, and obviously outside as well. And so have we always had to deal with that. The question that I think makes us much more exceptional now is that we're one of the few communities, say as Catholics and Christians, who share some common allegiance, which we're ready to suffer for and to sacrifice for, we say. When a husband and a wife, when two people get up and say, for better, for worse, until death do you part, this is a radically anti-capitalist statement. Because today, capitalism flourishes with flexibility, and flexibility means mobility, and mobility means you have to move at a moment's notice, and this is hard on families. And people do make sacrifices for those kinds of goods. And I do believe that parishes are becoming one of the most important places, whereas maybe 50 years ago there were other loci of this too. Parishes are becoming more important as places where this really happens. I mean, there's a lot of work and all that you know better than I. But it is idealistic, maybe. Other? Yeah, yes, sir.
This is a Jubilee year. What should be the actions of Catholics in fulfilling, or even starting to think about some mandates here?
The first one I'll start with my own institution is Notre Dame ought to forgive the debts of all of its graduates. Because this is not, this is a serious issue, because especially from professional schools, they graduate and they're so saddled with debts that they have to go out and earn big money. And a lot of them say, I'll doing that for 5 years and then I want to go work with the poor or something like that. But after 5 years you forget, or you get changed, or you get drawn into a kind of life where that becomes a remote possibility. And it really does undercut what we say we're doing, which is forming people to, transform society. So I really do believe that debt reduction on local levels, debt among nations is very important, but debt reduction on local levels is very important. And in Catholic institutions like that is one place I'd start. I don't know, I believe in communal penance services and acts of forgiveness and reconciliation, something like what people do in a certain step of AA. I think that should be promoted for people. People have a lot of things they need to reconcile with, just on a personal level, on a parish level. There's probably other people that may be able to answer this, but there's all kinds of ways, I think, that we would be able to more closely follow the gospel that was read in our churches yesterday. To do good, and when we do good, we become capable of heroic things like following Jesus. People say, look at them, look how they love one another. Yes, ma'am?
At what point does discriminating people of even the holy indifference concept become a silent vote, where it's rather ignored rather than making a statement in itself?
I think that's a danger that I would have to watch out for. That it could never be a recipe for passivity or silence, but rather that we need to be vocal about our indifference. In that sense, indifference isn't something that we would just shrug our shoulders, but that people would see by the way we live, and I think people do by the way we live, notice that there's something about our life. When my mother was well, she headed up the seniors group in the parish, and it was remarkable. Hundreds of people helping each other in this parish. Then she fell sick. We didn't know what to do as a family. My sister and me, that was it. And we didn't know what we should do for her. I had to put my mom in a nursing home. It was awful. Didn't trust any of them except the Little Sisters of the Poor, and they had a 2-year waiting list. And we wanted to bring her home and me leave Notre Dame, et cetera, and we started thinking about all that, and I just couldn't help think, but how on the parish level we need to work more at ways to make this kind of thing possible for people. There's all kinds of energy at that parish, and some money. And there are parish nursing programs which are sprouting up in parishes around the country. These are the kinds of things that is not silent, because people will bump up against healthcare issues and so on. Yeah.
I just want to say, I think it's important to vote, and I plan to vote. I respect your opinion, but I'm going to vote because I think there are significant differences between the major candidates. And it's important for the nation if we study those differences and choose. And so I'm going to vote. And I would encourage everybody here to vote.
You know, I'm reminded of a letter that Flannery O'Connor wrote to a friend of hers, and it was this time of year. In fact, it was on Election Day in Milledgeville, Georgia. And at the end of the letter, she goes, "Well, Mama and I are now going out to cancel out each other's vote." Yes, sir.
I just feel during your talk you fell into a common trap that Catholics use to balance what a strong pro-abortion position of Al Gore by saying that George Bush is a death penalty zealot. And you said he presided over all these executions. The fact is, in the state of Texas, the laws are that all he can do as the governor of Texas is go back to the court for a 30-day stay of execution. That's all he can do. Secondly, almost all those people were found guilty before he was even governor. Thirdly, if he was the governor of the state of Iowa, he couldn't preside over any executions. Our former governor was pro-death penalty, but it wasn't the law of the land.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it's an excuse for Catholics to fall into this trap of saying it's okay to vote for Al Gore because, well, George Bush is pro-death penalty. And I think that flies in the face of Catholic teaching.
So if you were bishop, you'd tell me how to vote. I mean, I respect I respect that a lot. I was just at a conference this weekend, and a woman stood up and said why she's voting for Bush, and she's never voted Republican in her life, and it was this reason. I myself would have difficulty not just over the death penalty, but over the kind of big money and the capitalism. And I suppose I fight against abortion on other fronts. I don't, as the percentage of abortions among Catholics rises to match that of the country overall, I think we've got problems in our churches. And if we continue to align ourselves, Democrat, Republican, left, or right, we'll lose sight of our deeper identity as baptized in Jesus and not find ways that we as communities can help people have their children. I respect what you're saying, but I don't think that George Bush in office is going to stop this tragedy either. It might, but it might not. And it's no matter what happens, it's still our task as a church to better embody life than we are. Yeah. One more question, and then.
Well, I'd like to make a comment that Al Gore is for the death penalty. Al Gore supports the death penalty. So there's no difference between the two. I will not vote for Al Gore or George Bush. I will agree with you 100%. I refuse to vote for either one of them.
Yeah.
Because they are part of the culture of death that Pope has talked about. The death of family farm, the death of the environment, the death of human rights. This country embargoes Iraq with 5,000 people. Children die every month. And this is part of the Clinton administration, part of the legacy of the Bush administration.
Yeah.
And the death penalty, you know, I'll be very frank. As a Catholic or as a Christian, I'm pro-choice for the simple reason because the culture of chauvinism in the Catholic Church is tearing apart women. They won't allow women priests. And then they turn around and say, let's go against this abortion deal. I mean, men have to take a look at women respectfully. The church has to look at women respectfully. Give them a place on that altar. And I really feel very sorry that we have this abortion is a serious question here in the church. And I challenged the priest once. I said, why don't you talk about how it's wrong to impregnate a woman if you're not going to have responsibility for that baby? Why don't we go after the men equation, the male equation on this abortion issue? Why doesn't the church do that?
I think no one wants to go after anyone, at least I don't.
Well, you know what
I think, I mean, just the passion that you speak with, I think, shows the depth of this issue.
Probably going to rot in hell for saying this, but I can't help it.
Nah, you aren't.
It's pretty serious. I really respect women. My mother taught Sunday school for many years. She was a good Catholic. She was a Methodist first, became a Catholic. Now, you know, it's crazy that if she had the qualification to become a priest, why she couldn't become a priest.
Yeah, I mean, I got to tell you this, though. I don't think those issues are equatable at all. I mean, you could show that there are some ideological connections between the two, but I think we are talking two different issues. We're talking about life, unborn children. And that troubles me. I'll be honest. That troubles me more than the fact that women aren't being ordained. Both trouble me, but one really troubles me. One I think is a nightmare. And I think that we can only embrace life in the way that we live it, and that will show people that it's possible to have children, and that children are not our enemies. And that's the kind of society that we're living in, adversarially. And again, that goes back to the issue that we pit one against the other in terms of interests, rather than it's our interest to live for each other. You know, maybe it's good that we end on a kind of serious note, because, you know, there's not these kinds of discussions with this many people happen all that much. And that is a good thing. So I really thank you for your what you said, and I really thank everyone here for listening. You want to close this out?
Thanks everyone for coming, and thank you.